Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co hosts. I am Dr. Joe Hamlett, and alongside me is Dr. Dave Peltz. What's going on, Dr. Dave?
Nothing, Dr. Joe. Another beautiful morning in southern Arizona.
I'm not going to say it's the same here. So it's a little gloomy outside, but we're doing what we love to do, so that's okay. All right. So thank you all for tuning in. So if you have tuned into our podcast before, thanks for returning. If you're brand new to the podcast, just know that this is the personal, professional, and career development podcast where we try to assist you with your journeys to hopefully get you to that next level, whatever that might be. So, with that, again, if you tuned in before, you kind of know our routine. One of us introduces the topic, and then we quickly pass it off to the other to see if they're off guard or not. So, for today's topic, I will be introducing today's topic, and it is applying yesterday's lessons. Right. So, Dr. Dave, when I say applying yesterday's lessons, what comes to mind for you?
That's a great question, Joe. We were discussing offline, what does yesterday's mean? Is it yesterday as in yesterday with an apostrophe S, or is it yesterday's with just an S, making it yesterday plural? And we settled on the plural version of yesterday's because
Right.
sometimes when you think about applying yesterday's lessons, it's not just the day before. It could be a few days, a few weeks, a few months before that you realize you have the aha moment or, oh, now I get it.
Right.
I can use that tidbit from that discussion or that meeting or that experience to apply going forward, and one of the examples that we were talking about is don't touch the fire because it burns. And then a few
Right.
days later, you're like, oh, maybe I should not touch that fire because I learned a few days ago that it's going to burn. So
Right.
sometimes you don't have a fire the next day. Maybe it's a few
Yep.
days down the road. So that's what it kind of means to me. When I start thinking about these things, what am I thinking about? Am I really paying attention to all the experiences, all the conversations that I'm having with people? Am I paying attention to what I'm doing? And what lessons can I glean from them that maybe I don't apply tomorrow, or maybe I'm not even aware that I learned that lesson, but that critical self-reflection that we talk about. And it doesn't have to, in this case, it doesn't have to be critical. It's just being present and aware instead of being that boat that's drifting down the river and just forgetting about everything that's behind you. It's because there's always lessons that can be learned. So I'm going to
Right.
pause.
No, I think you make a good point. I think it does make more sense if you think about it in terms of yesterday's plural,
Mm-hmm.
because like you said, um, the what you learn from that day may not show up until a week later, a year later, and
Mm-hmm.
then you have to reflect on that. So I think the other thing that you brought up too is the fact that you don't do that critical, maybe not that critical self reflection all the time, but some type of reflection in a way that you can recall something similar to, or here's a situation where maybe I can apply some of those yesterday's learnings to today. So that's why I think it's important that you're always thinking about how you can apply, and I think we've talked about this before. It's just really taking stock on your skills, what you've learned, things that you bring to the table. That's a really good exercise to do that every now and then, just so you know what you have kind of in your toolbox or in your toolkit that you can go back and reflect on or apply it in a different manner. I mean, we've talked about this in many different ways. Having that experience, you don't do something for a period of time, and then as soon as you stop doing that and doing something else, you disregard everything you just did. So that's what we're kind of referring to when we say being able to apply even your skills, transferring those skills to a different industry, different organization, different relationship. That's what it's all about. It's just recalling those things that you can apply to today or tomorrow.
Yeah, I like what you just said about recalling because that's really what it is, and to your point, taking stock in what you bring to the
Yeah.
table. We both have very diverse backgrounds, and to just disregard those backgrounds as completely different as to what we've been doing for the past several years still does not make those it does not make them irrelevant.
Right. Yep.
There's always pieces that you can pick up from those past experiences, those past um, yeah, we'll just leave it at experiences, past experiences that can still be applied now. And
Right.
maybe your skill set is not as sharp as it used to be, but it gives you a point to pick up from,
Right.
and really, I think it makes you a little bit more present when you start taking that, applying yesterday's lessons and keeping that in the back of your mind going forward. Okay, to your point, maybe it's not the last couple of days, but maybe in 2 weeks from now, there's something from today's conversation that you and I are having that's going to kind of spark, and we'll go, oh, there's another thing that I learned
Right.
that I can use for today or going forward. And I think that remembering piece, recalling piece is really important because that helps us stay grounded and present, I believe.
Right. But I know maybe some of the audience may be thinking, how do you keep all that in your head? How do you know what's relevant?
Yeah,
How do you
yeah.
know what's, but I think it goes back to what you just said, is that presence piece that you're, when you're talking to people, you're actually listening to them. When you know, or maybe studying something, that you're actually taking the information in and not just doing it, say maybe just to pass a certification, but that you're
Mhm.
actually taking it to heart, that you're actually gaining something from that experience. And I think that's when it becomes a little bit easier to recall or to bring back up when you need it at a later
Mhm.
date. So I think that's the challenge to, because, you know, I think I've said this many times on here, is just I always have so many things going through my head
Yeah.
at a given time. So you're right. How do you pick out the things that are, you know, relevant or important or that I want to remember or should remember? So that is a challenge. And that's why I'll go back to what I said previously about the whole idea of taking stock on where you are today, where you came from. I mean, all those things are important to level out where you are today and where you're trying to go. So I think that's very helpful if you do that on a regular basis. I think you kind of touched on it earlier about just in a boat and just drifting. I mean, where you just don't have any thoughts. You know, you're not really thinking of anything in particular. You're just
Hmm.
going along with the flow, and then you're caught off guard. So that's why, you know, we talk about this all the time. Just that idea of taking stock. Where are you today? Where are you trying to go? Where did you come from? Just
Hmm.
keeping those things in mind. And I think it'll be a little bit easier to start to identify some of those things that are, you know, applicable down the road, or you can apply somewhere else. You can transfer it to something else.
Hmm. Yeah, and the part about being caught off guard, I think that's an important piece that you touched on because so many of us are tied to our electronic devices these days, unfortunately or
Right.
fortunately. And how many meetings or even just conversations are we having? And we look down at our phones and we're or tablets or whatever, and we're like
Yeah.
distracted, and then you miss something because you're
Yeah.
really not present. You're not paying attention. You know, take those devices. It's okay to pause those devices and be present in the moment. It reminds me of teaching classes to students, and I see someone on their phone and I ask them a question and they look up like, deer caught in the headlights. What? That's
Right.
right, because you weren't paying attention. You
Right.
weren't present in the moment. There's a time and place for everything. And if you're having a conversation with someone, give them the respect to pay attention and listen, actively listen to what they're saying and pay attention. Or if you're experiencing something, really experience it. If you're in a movie, are you going to be looking at your phone the whole time in a movie theater? I hope not, because now you're missing the movie, right? That's why you went to the theater.
Well, then you're
So,
probably going to have irate people that want to kick you out too. So,
and you know what? And that's a great statement because if you're in a meeting not paying attention and someone asks you a question and then they ask it again and you're like, what? Because you weren't paying attention, you weren't present, and that's a big deal these days. That goes along with respect and accountability, and yeah, just being present in that moment and paying attention, even at home. You're talking with your family members and you're looking out at your phone and they're talking to you and you're not even realizing it,
right.
and it's
Yeah.
like, what did you just miss out on? Maybe they just said, hey, the house is on fire, you need to get out, and you're just still playing your games
Right.
or buying something online or something.
Right. Well, you know, you talk about the being present piece, and having conversations. So I've, had started conversations with people, and I can see when they're distracted,
Yeah.
then that's when I shut down. That's when the conversation for me is pretty much over, because like you said, you haven't paid me the common courtesy of listening or paying attention. And so I'm really quick to stop the conversation. If I'm even if I'm in mid story, mid stride, I'll be like, "Oh, okay, that's good," and I'll walk away, or I'll just
Hmm.
stop talking, and they'll look at me like, "Oh, what were you saying?" I'm like, "Oh, nothing. Don't worry about it." And I've
Right.
literally done that, and then that person, we separate, and they didn't get anything from that conversation, or didn't get anything because they weren't present.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a huge part of just showing, common courtesy and respect to one another, to have those conversations. And that's what I try and do. When me and the wife are watching TV at night, I'll put my phone face down. So even if it flashes, and I always turn it off. I don't even have it on vibrate, just because, again, I want to be present.
Hmm.
Even if we just have just random conversations about the show or the movie, I still want to be present in those conversations. So, and I
Yeah.
find that me and the wife converse back and forth a lot. So an hour show might take us an hour and a half, because we'll stop and restart the movie or the show, because we're having those conversations in between. But I love that, because, again, we're both being present and not trying to talk over the show or missing important parts of the show or the movie,
Hmm.
but to rather tune all that out and have that direct conversation.
Yeah. And these little things really do apply towards applying yesterday's lessons,
Yeah.
because you have to be present in the moment in order to find those lessons or to receive those lessons. And it could be a simple piece of advice. And that's really where we're kind of going with this, is not just being present, but paying attention so that you get something out of it. You may not realize you get something out of it today, but in a few weeks or a few days or a few months, or like you said, even a year or two, it might just be that aha moment that you can apply something. The military
Right.
taught us that. Always be paying attention to your surroundings and be engaged so that you
Right.
can get something out of it. If you're qualifying with a weapon system, you may not be doing well the first 2 weeks, and all of a sudden you remember that advice from the instructor and you apply that advice, and all of a sudden everything clicks, and you've got it just that quick.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think back to when, we talked about meetings earlier. And one of the things that I always disliked in our meetings, whenever we had the responsibility, especially being in the military, being a senior leader, and having to pass on information to your, subordinate troops, and sitting in a room full of all these leaders, and no one's taking notes.
Mm-hmm.
And I always walked away thinking, how can you pass on all this? We just been in this meeting for an hour. You didn't write anything down, and we talked about a lot. How are you going to be able to accurately portray what the meeting was about? Or how are you going to be able to pass that information on to someone else? Because, again, I know our memories, our minds can do amazing things, can, put a lot of things in there, but it's trying to put all that information back out to that group of people that you're supposed to pass this information on. So I always found that irritating when I'd be the only one sitting in a meeting taking all these notes, 2 and 3 pages of notes, and I look at my peers, and they haven't taken one note. And a lot of times I used to think, well, am I not as smart as everybody else, and I have to do
I
this?
don't think that's the case, Dr. Joe.
I
There's a
don't think
DR in
so
front of your
either.
name.
Well, and the tell for me would be when I go out back out and start talking to some of the uh, you know subordinates of these other leaders, and my team that I passed all the information on to would be well informed. But then when I talk to somebody else from one of those other teams, they'd be like, "Well, when did that come out? Or when did you learn about that? Or what happened?"
Mhm.
And that's when I would know, no, they're not passing that information on to
Yeah.
other people. So that whole presence piece, that whole trying to categorize things, and that's what I still take notes. I have so many little notepads and notebooks where I've just taken notes on almost every event I go to, every little meeting I go to. I take a couple of notes because I
Mhm.
know my brain can't, hold on to all of that, or it can't, bring it back out in proper context. So
Mhm.
that's why I take all these notes, and then I even look back at notes from years ago and I think, oh wow, I remember that and I've used that. So that's why it's important to really think about how you can apply those uh, learnings from yesterday to today. If you've got it, some type of note somewhere, some type of trigger mechanism that says, hey, this applied here, and
Mhm.
now I can see how it applies there. So
Mhm.
that's what's been helpful for me, is to take notes, is to really pay attention when I'm in those meetings and walk away. And I, afterwards, I'll even converse with friends and say, hey, did you remember that? No, I didn't. I didn't remember that. And I'd flip my notepad up, and say, "Yeah, they said this right here," and then they're like, "Oh, okay." So to me, that's just been my approach, is to, because again, I don't know when this information may be relevant for me in the future.
Mhm.
So I'm a note taker. I'm a person that tries to capture as much as I can in that moment, so that I can, hopefully apply it down the road.
Yeah, and to your point, people learn differently. People,
Right.
remember things differently. Some people are auditory, some people are kinesthetic, some people are visual. It just depends on how you learn in that case. And and I like what you're saying about, taking those notes and be able to go back to them, because you might find a lesson in there that you didn't realize in the moment.
Yeah.
And you can't do that without being present. That's we believe that that's the key. You have to be present in order to learn a lesson, because if you're not present, you're not going to get a lesson out of whatever is being discussed or being done at that point. You're going to miss
Right.
something. And you know there are so many times that we're not present, and it's not, sometimes it's not even deliberate. We just get lost in our own thoughts or in that
Right.
moment, or we hear something and we start processing it, and then we're not present, and then we miss something. So
Right.
the taking notes piece, I believe, is really important. Some people record it, record meetings so
Right.
they can go back and do transcripts, or just listen to it again and again and again, so it really gets buried deep in their mind for it to click. And
Right.
really, what we have to pay attention to, I think, is that to what we said earlier, giving the other person respect, to be in the moment, or giving that event the respect it deserves, to be present. I was just thinking in my mind, it'd be like going on a roller coaster but falling asleep before it starts and then waking up
Right.
after it ends.
Right.
Did you enjoy that experience? You don't remember it because you weren't there, you were asleep. So give give the moments and experiences in your life that respect that they deserve, so that you can have lessons later. There's things that I did yesterday that I didn't know, I didn't learn from until I started thinking about this morning when we were talking about it,
Right.
helping my son with some of his projects. It's like, oh, I did learn something from that because I was present. And if I
Right.
wasn't present, there would be a lesson from there.
Right. Well, like I say, now that I think probably both of us are really intentional about the things we do, how we view them. But that's taken a lot of years to get to this point,
Yeah.
because I was just like most people, where you just went along with the flow, didn't really think, didn't plan for the next day, really. Just
Hmm.
got up, did your normal routine, and didn't really take into account all those things that we're just talking about. And it's funny because me and the wife were just reflecting, talking yesterday about things that happened in our past, and how we view it now versus how other people view it. And that this kind of this conversation we we're talking about, people, you can share your experience with people. You can, tell them how you did it, but it's still not gonna, they're still probably gonna have a difficult time relating to it unless it happens to them.
Hmm.
And that's kind of the same thing. Again, we became really intentional about certain things because of the situations we were in. So we were forced to, really pay attention to those things and to apply those lessons learned to the future. And that's
Mhm.
what's helped us move forward, because we have taken those lessons from our parents, from our friends and family around us. We didn't necessarily have to always, touch the socket or stick the socket in the fork in the socket to feel the shock. We
I don't know.
saw
I did that a
somebody
few
else do
times.
it.
I don't know.
Well, so you're maybe one of those people that had to experience it multiple
Yeah, it's more
times.
experiential. It takes a few times.
But that's what we learned, is instead of, having to go through all this ourselves, seeing other people go through certain things and saying, hey, we see that's not a good thing. The outcome is not good. So we're going to steer clear from that. So it may not even been our lesson, but we saw somebody else's lesson that we
Hmm.
applied to the future. So I think that's also important. It doesn't, a lot of us, like you said, there's different ways we all learn things, but we're kind of the approach that if we see it and it doesn't work, we're not going to get in that same line, go do the
Hmm.
exact same thing so we can experience it ourselves. We're going to
Right.
say, okay, I saw what happened after that. I'm not going to try that. And then I applied their lessons,
Right.
or their situation to something that we could use to improve our situation, or, not fall into that same trap. So, just being present, paying attention to your surroundings, like you mentioned before, I think the military helped us with that situational awareness, and, knowing when to look out for those. Um, Potential hazards, those types of things, or just, just being more in tune to your surroundings. I think that's helped us, uh, in our family life, everything we've done, just because of that understanding of your surroundings, the things that, that you can glean from, the things that you don't have to repeat. I think that's what's helped us get to where we are today.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go back to something you touched on, that kind of debriefing thing that the military taught
Right.
us. And you mentioned it earlier, going up to your colleagues and peers and saying, "Hey, what'd you think about this? What'd you get out of this? This is what I got out of it." That
Right.
debriefing is an important piece, because maybe you did miss something, and
Yep.
maybe they missed something that you each captured that you can add to your notes. And
Yep.
the debriefing piece is really important, I believe. And I know you believe it too, because
Absolutely.
that's how you get those lessons learned.
Yep.
And it makes you more present in that debriefing, because it forces you to reflect on
Yep.
those lessons from just a few moments ago or a few hours ago. So hopefully you won't trip over the barbed wire in the field,
Right. Right.
or you won't run into that post because you're looking backwards when you should have been looking forwards. Not that I've done that too many times, but you know, it has happened. So, paying attention and just, you know, those those um those debriefs are really a really cool tool to implement.
And I hadn't even thought about that, but you're absolutely correct. That is another way that you, again, gain. Well, the other part of it is you gain that perspective from someone else who may have seen the exact same thing you just did, but they viewed it differently, and then that introduces that, that curiosity or that question of, oh, you might be right. I didn't see it that way, or I didn't
Hmm.
think of it that way. So you're right. I often find myself after a big, maybe a company town hall or big meeting, and then afterwards you're just thinking about it, and you're like, you do approach your colleague and say, hey, what did you get out of it? What did you get from that? And then you start to piece all that together, and you're like, oh wow, okay, now it makes sense. Or, oh, I gained something else from it. I thought they were talking about that. So you're right. I think that debrief, is a another tool to help you apply those lessons. Again, I like the idea of with your colleagues, their perspective on it, and maybe piecing it together differently than what you may have initially thought. So I didn't even think about that, but I know I do that all the time. So I do appreciate that, just
Yeah.
getting other people's perspective of how they viewed it, what they
Hmm.
gained from it.
And maybe you're just taking those mental notes or physical notes and saying, "Oh, that's interesting, the different
Yep.
perspectives," or "I don't agree with that." And then several yesterdays go by, and then all of a sudden it does make sense.
Yep.
Not that your
Yep.
perspective was wrong, but they provided a different lesson that you can
Yep.
apply because the different perspectives that we each have. You know, we've talked about this before. Groupthink is not a good thing.
Right.
And, you know, when you're creating a good solid team, you don't want everyone being, all the experts there are just experts in being analytical. You need
Right.
different people. You need a diverse group, a diverse group of people on that team so you can get those different perspectives. So there are very rich lessons coming out of it. Again,
Right.
you may not realize it at that moment, but 3 months, 4 months down the road on that project, something might click, and then there's a lesson you can apply.
Right. No, I think everything we touched on is definitely some of those things that you need to consider when you're applying yesterday's lessons, and they don't come just in the form of your own lesson. I mean, it's a combination, it's a accumulation of all that information being processed. But I think one of the challenges for probably most of us is how do we process it? How do we put it back in our memory banks or store it somewhere where what we touched on earlier, being able to recall it, being able to come back to it and say, oh, now I remember that, 2 years later, 3 years later. I think that's the part where most people might have, a difficult time doing. Again, because, we take in so much data, information every day. And then to try and put it up again and somewhere in your brain where you can recall it is a challenge. But I think the more you do the reflection, the more you intentionally think about, okay, how can I use this? Or again, take notes, something physical that you can maybe go back to, down the road and say, oh, now I remember that. Oh, okay, now it makes sense. So I think that's some of those things that all of us can improve on. Like I say, just being able to figure out a process that helps you to recall things. Because I that's why we touch on so much the idea that all those experiences are valuable for you because you can, even if it was a bad experience,
Mhm.
hopefully you have a good lesson from it that, oh, I'm not going to do that again. But if you're like Dave, you're going to go ahead and continue to stick the fork in the socket.
I think after a while it starts feeling good sometimes.
So yeah, so you may learn that, okay, I like this pain. So that's the way you have to view this, as no matter what the situation, I can gain something from this. I can learn something from this. And that's why I think it's so powerful. Even when you think about a mentor mentee relationship, the whole old thought or idea is that you can only be a mentor if you're older than someone, you're more
Right.
wiser than someone, but that's not the case. My kids are way more intelligent than I am on certain things, technology, those types of things, because that's what they know, that's what they grew up with. So that's why I'm always open to hearing someone else's perspective, their experience, because they may have years of experience compared to me, even though I'm much older. So that's why it's important to really go into it with what lesson can I learn? How can I improve? How can I be better? What do I take away from this? What can I apply in my life? And so Dave is trying to give me the peace sign, but he's also saying it's 2 minutes. So trying to nonchalantly say, "Hey, that's enough." But this has been. I think it's something that I'm really passionate about, just how we can apply those things to tomorrow. So, Dave, I'll give you a couple of minutes to share what your takeaway is, or what you want to leave our audience with as far as applying yesterday's lessons.
Yeah, I think one of the points you just made is really gonna hit home because we've talked about, you know, our yesterday's lessons, but what about other people's yesterday's lessons?
Uh,
And I think that's a huge takeaway. You know, it's not just about your yesterday's lessons that you're applying, it's about other people that you're talking to and their yesterday's lessons
yeah,
because that's where you save time and you're not reinventing the wheel.
yeah.
So I'm gonna pause there. I think that's a good note to end on for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think we covered a lot of things in here, but I just one thing I want to just again stomp on is just the idea that every situation you're in, every encounter can be a lesson learned. So if you view it that way, what can I take away from this, whether it's bad or good? How can I apply it in a positive way for tomorrow? So I'll leave it at that. Again, I just got started rambling at the end just because, like I said, I think this is one of the things I've learned to do better than I did in the past, and so I just want to pass that on to our audience as well. So thanks for tuning in today's episode. Applying yesterday's lessons, I think we can all benefit from that. Figuring out how those lessons can help us in the future. So if you are returning, thanks again for your support. Thanks for tuning in and spending time with us. This is our fun time. So thanks for sharing that with us. And if this is your first time, thanks for showing up. If you know somebody out there who may benefit from this information, share this podcast with them. Or if there's topics you want to hear about, things you want to discuss, please drop us a comment, share, subscribe. We're always looking for guests. Just let us know how we can continue to support you and help you in your journey. So, with that, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.